Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hamidan wa musalliyan ala rasulihil kareem. Thank you very much for joining. So we will start our session, which is the session 4 of the course on Islamic economics. So last week we had looked at the worldview and goals of the Islamic economic system. So I'll spend a couple of minutes to recap what we've looked at in the last 3 weeks. So we said every economic system has 3 components: the worldview, the goals, and the strategy. And we started looking at the capitalist worldview, and we talked about the secular view of the Enlightenment, and as opposed to that, we looked at the Islamic worldview, which is based on Tawheed, based on the sovereignty of God, the vicegerency of man. Similarly, we started looking at the role of the government. So in the capitalist system, there is the concept of laissez-faire, which is the government needs to stay out and the economy will run on autopilot. However, as opposed to that, in the Islamic worldview, there is an active role of the government. The next idea was of the capitalist system was the idea of utility maximization, which was the satisfaction and pleasures achieved from the consumption of goods and services. However, we said that in the Islamic worldview, the objective of the Muslims is maslaha in this life and the next. Similarly, we looked at the concept of self-interest, and that we said is coming from Thomas Hobbes. And the idea is that the individuals are self-interested and they only behave and act in their self-interest. As opposed to that, in the Islamic worldview, we have both self-interest and social interest that go hand in hand. We also looked at the rational economic man, which is the self-interested consumer, the utility maximizer. As opposed to that, we have the Islamic personality, which is some have called as the Homo Islamicus in the literature. And of course, this Homo Islamicus is an Islamic personality who abides by the teachings of Islam. Finally, in the worldview, we looked at social Darwinism and how competition is central to capitalism, which leads to oligopolies, to collusions, and elimination of competitors. So as opposed to that, in the Islamic paradigm, we have the idea of competition, but we also have the idea of cooperation between the various economic agents. So in terms of the goals, in the capitalist worldview, the goal of the capitalist economic system is the maximization of wants, and there is no distinction between needs and wants here. And as opposed to that, in the Islamic paradigm, we have needs and wants. Needs called as daruriyat, and then beyond that we have the hajiyat and the tahsiniyat, which we discussed at length last week. And also the ultimate goal is success in this life and the next. And finally, the strategy of capitalism is the market mechanism, which is basically allowing the consumers and producers to come together in the market and fulfill the demands and needs of the consumers based on their preference and their ability to pay. However, we mentioned that in the capitalist economic system, the focus is on production and distribution is not an independent topic. So inshallah, we're going to look at the strategy of the Islamic economic system today. So let's begin. Bismillah. This is week 4 of the course, and we are discussing the strategy of the Islamic economic system today. Unlike the strategy of the capitalist economic system, which is primarily the market mechanism, the strategy of the Islamic economic system is multifaceted, and the way the goods and services are distributed in an Islamic society to fulfill the needs of the people is through various means. So we're going to look at each one of these in detail. So The first component of the strategy is what I've called pre-production. So these are the exogenous factors. These are the factors which are the preconditions that must exist even before the production begins. So these are namely the ownership structure, the education system, the political system, and economic and financial structure. So even when the production doesn't begin, these systems and the frameworks must exist for the Islamic economic system to be successful. So that's pre-production. The second component is production. So the goods and services are produced in an Islamic economy by the forces of demand and supply. However, there are detailed rules of production, what can be produced, what can be consumed. Similarly, there are detailed rules for the Islamic market. So there are several prohibitions, there are rules by which an Islamic market has to be managed and organized. So we look at those as well. The third component of the strategy is distribution. So there are 4 factors of production, as we know: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur. So these factors come together to produce goods and services. And once these goods and services are produced, they are sold, and then the returns or the sale price is shared between the 4 factors. And how Islam shares or Islam recommends the sharing of the returns we'll discuss in the category of the distribution. And finally, we'll look at redistribution. So even after the production and distribution, if there are certain segments of people in the society which have been left out, which have been neglected, abandoned, or people who are dependent, like the poor and the needy, the disabled, women, the elderly, children, and so on. So there is a detailed redistribution mechanism, a redistribution system by which these people are extended help and provided goods and services to fulfill their needs. So this is the broad picture. This is the framework of the Islamic economic strategy for delivering and distributing goods and services in an economy. So inshallah, in today's lecture, we will focus on pre-production. So we look at the 4 components, i.e. the ownership structure, the education system, the political system, and the financial and economic restructuring. And then inshallah, we'll look at the remaining 3 components later. Allah is the ultimate owner of all resources, and the ultimate ownership belongs to Allah. And the ownership is granted by Allah, and He determines what can be owned and not owned. What is the ownership of the private individuals, and what is the ownership of the public? So based on the will of Allah, the ownership is divided into 3 categories. So part of the resources of an economy are owned privately. So we have the concept of private ownership. The second type of ownership is public ownership, and the third is the Waqf ownership. So let me just explain each one of them. So the private ownership is basically the private individuals and households who own the factors of production, who own the resources. And ownership means an exclusive right or control over a thing. So let's look at the second category, the public ownership. So these are the resources which are owned by the public, and these are managed by the state. So we have the hadith in Abu Dawud. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, people are partners in 3 things: in pasture land, water resources, and fire. And in some other narrations, we also have salt and other things. So this gives the basis of the idea of public ownership, where these resources, there are certain resources that cannot be privatized. These are public resources, and they have to be managed by the state for the benefit of the public at large. The third kind of ownership is the Waqf ownership, and Waqf basically means an asset which has been transferred to the ownership of Allah, which does not have an owner as far as individuals are concerned. And typically these waqf are intended to support the communities or families or the ummah at large. So the main point, what's the main point of this? The main point is that the production in the Islamic economic system is not entirely in the hands of private individuals. Some of the goods and services are provided by the public, i.e. by the state, which is managing on behalf of the people. So things like mineral resources, energy, water, lands, forests, roads, and so on and so forth. So these services and these goods are produced and distributed by the government who is acting in the interest of the people. And these cannot be privatized. So similarly, Waqf also provides certain services, like historically we had caravanserais for travelers, we have Waqf hospitals, we have Waqf schools, and so on and so forth. So these three forms of ownership come together to produce and distribute goods and services in an economy, in an Islamic economy. So some more points about public ownership. So government, as I said, is the producer and distributor of some of the goods, and government ensures that there is full employment of the public resources, and the pricing has to be in the interest of the society. Since the ultimate owner is the society, these goods and services, i.e. things like energy and gas and water, the government may charge a nominal cost to cover the cost of the production, but the price has to be in the interest of the society. Similarly, we have concepts like iqta and ihya ul mawat, whereby there are lands which are unutilized and they can be given to the individuals to bring them into productive use. And if an individual revives the land, he brings it to productive use, then he becomes the owner of that. So this is also part of the public ownership of unutilized lands, which can be privatized based on productivity. The second component of the strategy is the education system, and this point is very crucial because the Islamic system is an integrated whole. So we cannot have an Islamic economic system with a political system which is not Islamic. So it's integrated systems. So Islamic economics has close links with the Islamic education system. And this is the idea of education being an exogenous filter. So if people are receiving an Islamic education, they are being nurtured. If they have an Islamic personality, that will change their preferences, that will make them more responsible, and of course that will affect the production and distribution in the society. So let's have a look at some of the impact of an Islamic personality or Islamic education. So in terms of consumption, an Islamic consumer will not want unnecessary wants or luxurious goods and services, interest-based loans, intoxicants, etc. So this will minimize the unnecessary claims on the resources. Similarly, an Islamic producer who has an Islamic personality will produce need-fulfilling goods. It will not try to eliminate the competitors. It will not engage in predatory practices, and it will also look after the employees and the environment. Similarly, we need an Islamic personality because redistribution is a very central aspect of the Islamic economic system. We want people to be generous, to be charitable, and involved in zakat and sadaqah and waqf. And for that, of course, unless the education system is such that it molds and shapes the people, then we cannot expect these functions to be fulfilled. Similarly, an Islamic investor will make sure that his investment is in line with the principles and rules of Islam. So what we see in here is that the focus is not just on the government to solve all the problems. So we are starting with the human being, with the individual itself, with the Muslim who needs to be shaped and who needs to have an Islamic personality. And this happens even before the Islamic personality or the Muslim comes to the market. And without these values, then of course an Islamic economic system cannot be successful. So some of the ways on how we can have an Islamic personality, of course, at the systemic level, is we need quality education, tarbiyah and tazkiyah. We need the involvement of mosques, educational institutions, media, and social reform organizations to bring that change and produce Islamic personalities and Homo Islamicus, whose consumption, production, and investment decisions are based on the values of Islam. So the next component of the Islamic strategy is the political system. Again, I will reiterate that the economic system is very closely intertwined with the education system and the political system, and they all have to come together to achieve the maqasid of the Sharia. We have the definition provided by Ibn Khaldun in Al-Muqaddimah, where he said Al-Khilafah is running the affairs of people to achieve their best interest in this worldly life and in the next life in accordance with the Sharia. So Ibn Khaldun is very clear that the purpose of the political system is to ensure the falah and the maslahah and the best interest and welfare of the people, not just in the next life, but also in this life in accordance with the Sharia. So the state, the political system is subordinate to the Sharia, is fully committed to the Sharia. And the state is responsible to the people. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, every one of you is a shepherd and responsible for his flock. Other features of the Islamic political system are it's shura-based. Amruhum shura bainahum. Chapter 42 mentions that the affairs of the Muslim community must be taken on the basis of shura. Similarly, the Islamic ruler has to be representative. He must derive political authority from the people. Similarly, the Islamic ruler has to be accountable. We have the example of Abu Bakr radiyallahu anhu when he became the caliph. He said, if I act rightly, help me, but if I act wrongly, correct me and set me right. Also, another feature of the Islamic political system is equality before the law. And Allah says in chapter 4, وَإِذَا حَكَمْتُمْ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ أَن تَحْكُمُوا بِالْعَدْلِ. So all, each and everybody, the rich and the poor, must be dealt with equally before the law. So what are the functions? What are the roles of the government in an Islamic economy? So first of all, the role of the government is the enforcement of the Sharia and preventing injustice. Also, the protection of internal and external security, safeguarding and dissemination of religion, and those require economic development, investment in science and technology, and military might. The second function of an Islamic government is the guarantee of daruriyat and ensuring the priorities in production and distribution. And we've looked at the daruriyat last week. These are the essentials in the form of food, clothing, shelter, basic education, and health. The next role of the government is management of public properties. As we said, there are 3 types of properties. The second category of properties is public properties, and these have to be managed by the government in the interest of the public. The next function of the government is working towards the well-being of the society, and this is beyond the daruriyat. This is beyond the basic needs. Of course, after those basic needs have been fulfilled, the government has to play a role in ensuring the well-being of the society in the achievement of tahsiniyat and hajiyat. The next role of the government is ordaining that which is good and preventing that which is bad, and also the collection and distribution of zakah. In an Islamic economy, the government plays an active role, and the public interest takes precedence over private interest. We have this ayah in chapter 4, which says, "Do not give the feeble-minded your property that Allah has made a means of support for you, and do feed them from it and clothe them and speak to them in fair words." So wealth should not be left at the mercy of people who are incompetent to handle. And this is the idea that if there is a serious or a severe concentration of wealth, Maulana Maududi says it is incumbent upon an Islamic state to take over the management of the properties of those who either lack totally the capacity for good management or cause social damage by misuse. So the implication here is that if there is a serious concentration of wealth and that is causing a damage to the society, there is a case for acquisition and taking over the management of the property in the interest of the maslahah of the society. And this is also a function of the government. The social interest takes precedence over private or individual interest, as you can see and derive from this ayah. Another role of the government is the institution of Hisbah, and this is basically the elimination of morally condemned goods and services from both production and distribution. So the institution of Hisbah ensures that norms and standards of moral behavior are strictly observed. So no fraudulent practices take place in the market, no hoarding, speculation, no cheating of weight and measures, and fairness of prices, and no monopolistic practices in the market. So this is an important institution which ensures that no player in the market is so strong that it exploits the consumers or the employees. So this institution of Hisbah maintains balance in the market. Finally, in the pre-production section, we have the financial and economic restructuring. An Islamic economy needs an Islamic financing and economic infrastructure. Professor Umar Chapra refers to this as financial and economic restructuring to explain how we can transition from the current capitalist economy to an Islamic economy. So in this course, we are not focusing on finance and banking because they are very detailed topics. However, we must note some of the main rules pertaining to the finance. And these are as follows. So first of all, the financial reforms. The first is the abolition of riba. The second is abolition of gambling, the abolition of sale of debt, etc. So riba, in simple terms, refers to the predetermined increase in the amount of debt. We'll discuss some of the details about riba in a later lecture. But for now, let us understand riba as an excess or any increase above the amount of the principal or above the amount of the debt. So that's prohibited in Sharia. And similarly, gambling is a zero-sum game where one party gains and the other party loses. This is also forbidden in Sharia. Similarly, the sale of debt. Any sale of debt to a third party, which is either at a premium or a discount, is not permissible. A lot of issues in the current financial system are arising because of the sale of debt, and especially if we look at the global financial crisis, one of the main reasons of the crisis was the sale of debt, whereby subprime debts were repackaged and sold as collateralized obligations, and that caused a massive spiral in the economy and in the financial sector. So that's an issue. Debt cannot be sold except at par value. So that needs to go in an Islamic economy, the financing must be based on equity financing, and that's the ideal form of financing, whereby all the parties, all the partners share the profits and losses. And we need to have a financial and corporate sector based on equity financing, based on profit and loss sharing. So those are some of the financial reforms or financial ideas that we need in the Islamic financial sector. Similarly, we need the economic restructuring. That is basically to make sure that we level the playing field. So right now, the capitalist economy is structured in a way which favors the capitalists. So to level the playing field, to make the market fair, to make the economy just and balanced, we need some restructuring and some reforms. This list, of course, is not exhaustive, but some of the main ideas which need to take place to be able to restructure the economy is the abolition of copyrights and patents, because these copyrights prevent the ilm from spreading and disseminating. Patents stop the sharing and dissemination of technology, so that has an adverse effect on the economy. Similarly, we need to have three kinds of ownerships. So as we mentioned in the previous slides, Islam establishes public, private, and Waqf ownerships, and that has to be reconstituted. So national resources such as oil and gas, water, minerals, and salt, these commodities and resources must be nationalized, i.e., they should be managed by the government for the benefit of the people. And oil and gas and similar minerals cannot be privatized. So that has to be reversed. Similarly, at the moment in the current capitalist system, the access to finance is only limited to the rich, and the poor are excluded. So we need to give access to the poor to finance based on equity and profit and loss sharing. Similarly, we need small and medium enterprises in an Islamic economy to be able to have more competition and a broader ownership of the means of production. Similarly, we need land reforms, and there is a need for redistribution since land has been acquired for centuries through unfair means and inheritance has been disregarded, and land holdings have become inequitably distributed in the Muslim world. A small number of absentee landlords control large tracts of lands. So there is a need for land reforms and redistribution to be able to establish justice and equity in Islamic economies. So this week we've covered pre-production, which is the first component of the Islamic economic strategy. And within pre-production, we looked at the four subcomponents. The first being the ownership structure, whereby we said an Islamic economy has a three-tier ownership structure consisting of the public ownership, private ownership, and Waqf ownership. Secondly, we said there is a need for an education system which is conducive to an Islamic economy. The education system should be such that it inculcates Islamic moral values in the Islamic consumers, producers, and investors, so that when they make economic decisions, these decisions are based on the precepts and rules and principles of Islam. Similarly, we said we need a political system which is conducive for an Islamic economy. The political and legal frameworks must be established which support the realization of the Islamic economy. Finally, we said there is a need for economic and financial structuring, and that includes some steps such as the abolition of riba, abolition of gambling, the sale of debt, the restructuring of the financial transactions based on profit and loss sharing, redistribution of land, access to financing for the poor, and so on and so forth. So this week, alhamdulillah, we've completed this section on pre-production. we look at production, distribution, and redistribution in the coming weeks, inshallah. Thank you very much for watching. We've come to the end of this week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.